There are a lot of apps, softwares, technology out there to help you keep your kids safe online. But in my opinion, Bark is the absolute best option out there for parents. I'm going to walk you through a little bit about what Bark is, why I love it, how I use it. We've been using it for about 5 years with our kids, and we will continue to use it. And so I'm going to go over like how Bark works, what Bark monitors, what kind of content it can monitor, what kind of management you can do for your kids' devices using Bark, the different options that Bark has as far as like the Bark software, the Bark phone, and actually just today they released the Bark smartwatch. So I'll tell you which of their products I've used, which ones I recommend. But essentially, Bark is a technology that runs in the background of your child's devices, scanning your child's activities online and on your smartphone or device, and alerting you to activities that are dangerous, activities and dangers, right? So they monitor text, social media, apps, and much more on your kids' devices, including photos and videos, voice memos that your kids send and or receive. Basically, whatever's going on your phone, it is monitoring it, and you are getting alerted to anything that is concerning. So you can you can control the intensity. We get a lot of alerts for things that are like football conversations for violence, right? It's a little overzealous at times, but I would prefer that. So when they find something alert or that you need to be alerted to, they send you an email and or text message or a notification on the app so that you can intervene and get your kids the help they need if they need it. It's all things ranging from bullying to suicidal ideation to body image issues, to sexual content to online predators. It's there. It is monitoring. You also have management, which we'll talk about in a minute, but you can share locations. You can, it gives you an opportunity to have proactive conversations with your kids about being safe online with, just the ways that you can manage the screen time, the rules, and what they have access to on their devices. So one of the big questions that people have about Bark or any monitoring software is, what does it monitor? And it monitors a lot, and there are some limitations that have it's to no fault of Bark's that they can't monitor it. So it monitors text messages, notes, photos, videos, voice memos, voice apps, email, apps. So this is where it gets a little bit complex. And I did link down below a link where you can go see what exactly is monitored via Bark, the software, the Bark phone, laptops, and all of those things using Bark. And it will give you a detailed description of what exactly is covered and monitored in these apps. For example, Instagram will monitor your child's posts, including images, videos, and captions, but they cannot monitor direct messages on Instagram because Instagram does not allow that kind of monitoring. That is a big thing to know because one of the biggest risks online is children being contacted by predators via these apps. So the same is true for pretty much every social media app. Discord is restricted. Snapchat, Discord cannot be monitored at all by anything due to their rules about their app. TikTok is restricted. Skype, Snapchat, all restricted in what they can do, not because Bark doesn't want to monitor them and keep your kids safe, but because those companies and those tech platforms say privacy of our users is more important than childhood safety. So that's where your education as a parent comes in, where you need to learn these things. You need to know what is monitored. You need to know what you're willing to allow your kids to have access to. You need to know how to set up checks and balances and systems to put on restrictions for your children if necessary. With the Bark phone, you can have full control over what can be downloaded, re-downloaded, whereas with Android phones and iPhones, the Bark phone is technically an Android phone, but with a non-Bark Android phone and an iPhone, you are pretty limited in what you can control your kids getting access to. And the things that you can put in place are very easy for kids to get around. So there are limitations with Bark. There is a link down below so that you can see what exactly those limitations are. so that you can decide based on the ages of your kids, your personal values, if it's better to get the app on an iPhone, the app on on an Android phone, or if it's better for you to just jump right in and get a full-blown Bark phone and Bark watch. So I won't go over all of those nitty-gritty details here, but definitely check the link below to get all of that information. You can also do location sharing. So it's equivalent to things like Life 360. You get it all in one. You get monitoring, the location services, but you also get the management all in one. So it reduces your need to get things like Famisafe or Life 360 or all of these other things that do these bits and pieces. Everything can be done within Bark. So let me tell you about how I use it with my family and why we use it this way and what I will be doing differently in the future. So we've been using Bark for 5 years now. When my oldest kids got their first phones, we got them phones because we were we were a family that was moving across the country a lot. And so my kids were leaving behind friends a lot. And we live in a time where we can keep our kids connected to people by giving them phones. So they were about 10 and 8 when they got their first iPhones, very young. But because we had this big purpose for wanting that. We wanted them to be able to stay in touch with their friends. Knowing that, we also wanted to have very rigid rules about how they could use their phones, what they could search for on their phones, and having monitoring on their phones. I didn't even know if that was a thing back then, but I looked it up and compared a couple different softwares, and Bark was the one that stood out to me. Bark is the only company that is really centered and focused on child safety, child internet safety, which is exactly what I needed. You will find a lot of others out there that are more focused on the tech and just restrictions. Bark is really thorough, and they've done a lot of really interesting and impactful projects on online predators and keeping children safe online and having really good data and information about what it's actually like for kids to be using these devices as much as they do. So as a parent, I felt like Bark really understood my concerns as a parent, and their software looked very intuitive, very easy to use. And I was right. So we ended up getting the Bark software in 2019 immediately on my kids' phones. And we let them know we have monitoring on here to make sure that we are doing our job as parents to keep you safe. And throughout those 5 years, there's a lot that's changed in the online world. And Bark is always my go-to resource for education and information on how to keep my kids safe, best practices. And since then, I've learned a lot about what the best kind of phones are for kids to have. And if I could go back in time, I would not get iPhones for my kids. Apple as a company, and maybe they're changing, maybe there's some political pressure being put on them this year. We'll see. Apple does not care about the safety of children online. Their priority, and to be fair, it is a private company, or it is their company. It's publicly traded, but whatever. They are a company that chooses to prioritize the privacy of their adult users. So what you need to know about that is that COPPA is some legislation that says online, an adult is considered 13 years old. So Apple will prioritize the privacy and security of anyone 13 and older. And to be honest, anybody 13 and younger, they don't really advocate for anyway. They just don't seem to care about keeping children safe online, specifically from predators online. And it's not because they don't know that this happens, that they know that their devices are addictive, they are harmful, they have created one of the most anxious generations, and they just don't seem to care to do anything about it. And they do not make it any easier. They actually have made it a lot harder for parents to keep their own kids safe on their product. So when I started with Bark, it was pretty strict and different than Android in that if your kids have an iPhone, in order for the monitoring to work, you have to be hooked up to the same Wi-Fi and at the same time, and they have to upload a backup to iTunes, and then Bark will run that backup through their software and monitor it then. So you don't get real-time monitoring, which can be pretty detrimental in certain situations for some kids. On Android, you can get in-time real-time monitoring. That's just one of Apple's features. If I could go back, I would go with Android for my kids for that reasons, for the amount of parental control. For my younger kids who are currently 5 and 7, they'll start with Bark phones or something like a Bark phone, where it's already built in and it's literally built with the safety of children in mind, to keep them safe from what it's like to be raised in a tech generation, what it's like to be raised, sent out into the abyss of the internet. And it's not a matter of like, I trust my kids are good kids. It's the rest of the world having access to them. These companies, these advertisers, these things like vaping accounts that target children to get them on their products, right? And that's one of the most extreme, but it's real. That is a real thing. So I would go, if I could go back, would not use Apple for my children. I would use Android at the very least. And then ideally, I would use a Bark phone for the amount of monitoring that it is able to do and the amount of control that you have as a parent. Now, my kids, we started them off with really strict rules and guidelines and expectations of what they can do on their phones. And so it's been fine for us. Like my kids with iPhones, they've been fine. We've held that line very strongly. They have pushed back, saying things like all kids say, I'm the only one without Snapchat. I'm the only one who doesn't get to do TikTok, which is not true. It's the only way that I can communicate with my friends, which is not true. We've really led them down the path of telling them we want to teach you in-person social skills. We want to keep you protected from these things as long as possible. It's not because we don't trust you. It's because there's a big whole world out there that can have direct access to you 24/7. And we're just not into that as your parents at this moment, right? So that is a little bit about how I use it and why I use it. It's very simple. I get a text message right to my phone and an email right to my inbox anytime I need to be alerted of something. There have been times where I get concerning information about my children or their friends. And because we get alerted and because my kids know that we have this set up, it's allowed us to have a lot of proactive conversations, but also to have insight into things that we need to have insight into, that our kids are navigating, in their lives. Now, a lot of people will argue when I was a kid, my parents didn't hear anything I was talking about at my sleepovers or my lunchrooms. And it's not the same. You cannot compare a lunchroom conversation or a sleepover with your friend to what kids are exposed to at the volume that they are exposed to it and the intensity that they are exposed to it. It's just not the same. It is parenting in a different time. There is a Facebook group that Bark runs called Parenting in a Tech World, where we have to think differently about this as parents. It is not the same as when we were younger. And I'm saying that as a millennial who was on MySpace when it first came out, right? And it started to change then, and it's only gotten more and more intense for these kids. That's why it is one of the most anxious generations there is. So Bark has been a great parenting tool for me. At times, it has been very frustrating, not because Bark doesn't work, but because Apple has made it difficult for me to get my kids' phones to sync up to my phone at the same time, right? Like it's just a technical thing that hopefully one day Apple will change. Hopefully Apple will care enough to change that, but maybe they won't. And if they don't, it's okay, because there is the Bark phone where you can just bypass that completely. But yeah, I love Bark. I think it's akin to wearing a helmet when your kids ride a bike. It's just something that should be done. You want to keep them protected. You want to keep them safe. It's a proactive tool that you give them to keep them safe. And it's a big, wide world out there on the internet. I think every parent wants what's best for their kids. So yeah, down below is a link where you can get Bark for yourself. Like I said, I use just the app, and I really only use it for monitoring at this point. I don't use it for management for my kids. I used to use it for screen times, for check-ins and things like that. But my kids are so used to this by now that I don't need to use that for them. There is the Bark phone. There is the Bark smartwatch, which I know nothing about because it was just announced today. There is a Bark router, I believe. They have a lot of really good products. I cannot recommend them enough. I believe if you use the code SIMPLIFY down below, you'll get 20% off on the app. I would just double check that. I don't think they honor that for the Bark phone, but well worth the money The app monitors unlimited devices, so you don't have to pay per device. You just pay one set fee per month, and every single device you have is covered. And yeah, if you have questions, comment down below and let me know them. But overall, I think Bark is an amazing tool for parents. It allows you to give your kids the freedom and the privacy that they deserve while still having a buffer of safety and security for them. Because we all know saying, I'm going to check your phone is not good enough. They're going to delete things, they're going to hide things. It's so easy for kids to do. And it's not because they are bad kids. It's not because they're not trustworthy. It's just because this is the age that we're living in and their brains aren't developed enough to handle this. So, questions, comments, concerns below, let me know. Check the description to get everything you need to get started with Bark, and I will talk to you soon.